The woman entered the courtroom like a whisper, her worn loafers making almost no sound on the polished marble floors. Her name was Anya Sharma, and she clutched a faded fabric satchel to her chest, as if it held the last remnants of a shipwreck. Her dress, a simple, unassuming navy blue, had been mended neatly at the hem, a testament to a life lived with care and not much excess. She found a seat at a plain wooden table designated for the respondent, a table that seemed miles away from the imposing judge's bench and the gleaming mahogany expanse where the petitioner's legal team was already assembling. Around her, the air hummed with the low murmur of expensive suits, the click of heels, and the rustle of important papers. Anya felt the eyes on her, fleeting glances that dismissed her before they even truly saw her. One lawyer, a woman with a sharp haircut and an even sharper gaze, leaned over to her colleague, a portly man whose tie strained against his collar, and whispered something. The man chuckled, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement, and Anya knew without hearing the words that she was the subject of their amusement. She was the forgotten photograph in a grand album, the uninvited guest at a banquet of consequence. But Anya didn't flinch. She placed her satchel on the table, her hands trembling only slightly, and took a deep, steadying breath. The scent of old wood, floor wax, and an undercurrent of nervous sweat filled her nostrils. This was not her world, this arena of combative intellect and procedural warfare, but it was where she had to stand, for reasons far more profound than anyone in this room could yet imagine. The case was deceptively simple on its surface. A dispute over a small plot of land, a community garden she had tended for over 20 years, now slated for a luxury high-rise development by a monolithic corporation. They called it progress. Anya called it erasure. Before we delve deeper into Anya's daunting battle, if you believe in the power of quiet courage and the idea that one person standing for truth can indeed move mountains, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. The lead counsel for the petitioner, a man named Marcus Thorne, exuded an aura of invincibility. His suit was impeccably tailored, his silver hair swept back from a distinguished brow, and his voice, when he finally spoke to his junior associates, was a low, confident baritone that commanded attention. He glanced at Anya once, a cursory look that catalogued her simple attire and solitary presence, and then dismissed her as easily as one might swat away a bothersome fly. To him, and to the corporation he represented, she was a minor inconvenience, a small bureaucratic hurdle to be overcome with the well-oiled machinery of legal dominance. Anya knew the odds were stacked against her like a precarious tower of bricks. She had no lawyer. The cost was an impossible dream. She had only her meticulously gathered notes in her satchel, her memories, and a conviction that burned with a quiet, steady flame within her. The court clerk's voice announcing the judge sliced through the murmurs, and everyone rose. Anya felt a wave of dizziness, the sheer weight of the institution pressing down on her, but she straightened her shoulders. She thought of her grandmother, a woman who had faced down far greater storms with nothing but her dignity and the truth in her heart. "Be like the river," her grandmother used to say. Persistent, wearing down stone not with force, but with constancy. Anya clutched that wisdom to her now, a lifeline in a turbulent sea. The judge, a stern-faced woman with eyes that seemed to miss nothing, settled into her chair, and the proceedings began. Anya listened, her heart pounding as Marcus Thorne laid out his client's case, his words smooth, polished, and utterly devoid of the human cost involved. He spoke of zoning laws, economic benefits, and shareholder responsibilities, painting a picture of inevitable progress that Anya, in her quaint sentimentality, was trying to obstruct. Anya knew then that this was not just a fight for a piece of land. It was a fight for the soul of her community, a fight for the voices that were too often drowned out by the roar of money and power. She was just a simple woman, yes, but sometimes the simplest truths were the most powerful, and she was ready, in her own quiet way, to speak hers. The decision to represent herself had not been made lightly. Anya had spent countless sleepless Nights poring over library books on basic law, her small kitchen table covered in notes and photocopied pages. She had visited legal aid clinics only to be told her case, while sympathetic, was not a priority, or that their resources were stretched too thin to combat a giant like Thorne's firm. Friends had advised her to give up, to take the meager settlement the corporation had initially offered. "You can't win against them, Anya," one had said, her voice laced with pity. "They'll crush you." But the thought of the garden, its vibrant marigolds and fragrant herbs, the laughter of children who played there, the solace it offered to the elderly residents of her neighborhood, the thought of it all being paved over for another soulless tower of glass and steel was a pain too, deep to ignore. It was more than soil and seeds. It was a sanctuary, a living testament to community and connection in an increasingly disconnected world. Anya remembered a conversation with an old mentor, a retired schoolteacher named Mr. Henderson, who had seen her struggling with a particularly difficult math problem years ago. She had been on the verge of tears, convinced she wasn't smart enough. Mr. Henderson had gently taken the pencil from her hand. "Intelligence isn't just about knowing all the answers, Anya," he'd said, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "It's about knowing which questions to ask and having the courage to keep asking them, even when it's hard. Persistence, my dear, and a curious heart, those are your greatest tools." That memory became her shield. She might not know the intricate dance of legal precedent or the subtle art of courtroom rhetoric, but she knew her truth, and she knew the questions that needed to be asked. The corporation's lawyers, in their pre-trial filings and public statements, had already begun to paint her as an eccentric, an emotional woman clinging to the past, a Luddite standing in the way of urban renewal. Marcus Thorne, in a brief interview with a local paper, had been particularly condescending. "While we respect Ms. Sharma's attachment to the plot," he'd said, his tone dripping with insincere empathy, "the needs of a growing city and the economic benefits of this development far outweigh such personal sentiments. The law is quite clear on this matter." His words, plastered across the newsprint, had stung, but they had also solidified Anya's resolve. They didn't see her. They saw a caricature, a stereotype to be easily dismissed. They didn't see the meticulous records she kept, the photographs documenting the garden's history, the signed affidavits from community members whose lives it had touched. They didn't see the hours she spent cross-referencing city planning documents, highlighting discrepancies, and tracing the convoluted ownership history of the land, which, she suspected, was not as straightforward as the corporation claimed. The air in the courtroom on that first day was thick with an unspoken hierarchy. Thorne and his team, with their leather briefcases and confident strides, occupied their space as if by divine right. Anya, with her cloth satchel and quiet composure, seemed almost an intruder. She could feel the speculative glances from the public gallery, the mixture of pity and curiosity. When her name was called, and she stood to confirm her intention to represent herself, a ripple of surprise, quickly suppressed, went through the room. The judge, Justice Allister, raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Ms. Sharma," she said, her voice neutral but carrying an undeniable weight, "you are aware of the complexities of this case and the resources available to the petitioner." "I am, Your Honor," Anya replied, her voice softer than she intended, but steady. "And you still wish to proceed without counsel?" "Yes, Your Honor." Justice Allister held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded curtly. "Very well. Mr. Thorne, you may begin." Marcus Thorne rose, a picture of polished assurance. He smoothed his tie, gave a brief, almost imperceptible nod to the judge, and then turned his attention to the jury, his expression one of grave sincerity. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice resonating through the courtroom, "this is a case about progress, about the future of our vibrant city. It is about the lawful right of my client, Apex Development, to utilize property they legally own for the betterment of our community, creating jobs, generating revenue, and providing much-needed modern housing." He gestured vaguely in Anya's direction without looking at her. "Standing in the way of this progress is Ms. Sharma, who, with all due respect, appears to be guided more by sentiment than by statute." Anya listened, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Each word was a carefully aimed dart, designed to paint her as unreasonable, an emotional obstacle. She focused on her breathing, on Mr. Henderson's words about persistence. Thorne continued, outlining the corporation's plans, showcasing glossy architectural renderings of the proposed high-rise, a gleaming edifice that promised a new era of prosperity. He spoke of property rights as sacrosanct, of zoning ordinances, meticulously followed, of permits duly acquired. It was a compelling narrative, delivered with masterful skill, designed to make any opposition seem foolish, almost unpatriotic. Anya felt a knot tighten in her stomach, but her expression remained placid. She knew this was just the opening salvo, the carefully constructed facade she would have to dismantle, piece by painstaking piece, with nothing but her simple truth and the contents of her faded fabric satchel. The weight of the gazes in the room felt heavier now, the doubt more palpable. But deep inside, a small, resilient part of her whispered, "Let them underestimate you. It will be their first mistake." The first day of the trial unfolded with the predictable cadence of a well-rehearsed play, with Marcus Thorne as the confident lead actor and Anya as the silent, almost invisible stagehand. He called his first witness, a city planning official, a Mr. Davies, who, under Thorne's smooth questioning, testified to the flawless legality of Apex Development's permits and the project's full compliance with all urban development guidelines. Mr. Davies, a man whose nervousness was barely concealed beneath a veneer of bureaucratic importance, presented charts and documents, his voice droning on about subsections and amendments, creating an almost impenetrable wall of officialese. Anya listened intently, her pen scratching across her notepad, trying to follow the labyrinthine explanations. She felt a familiar wave of inadequacy wash over her. The language of the law was a foreign tongue, designed, it seemed, to exclude the uninitiated. Thorne's questions were leading, his tone encouraging, making Mr. Davies appear knowledgeable and authoritative. "And so, Mr. Davies," Thorne concluded, his voice resonating with certainty, "would it be fair to say that Apex Development has met every single requirement down to the last dotted I and crossed EAT for this project to proceed?" Mr. Davies puffed out his chest slightly. "Absolutely, Mr. Thorne. Their application was exemplary." Anya watched the jury. Some members were nodding along, their expressions serious, seemingly convinced by the weight of official testimony. Others looked slightly bewildered by the technical details, but none looked at Anya with anything other than a distant curiosity. The weight of the courtroom, the solemnity of the proceedings, the sheer confidence of her opponent, it was all designed to intimidate, to make her feel small and insignificant. When Justice Alastair turned to her and asked, "Ms. Sharma, do you have any questions for this witness?" A hush fell over the courtroom. All eyes were on her. Anya felt her palms sweat. This was it. Her first foray into the lion's den. She rose, slowly, her legs feeling a little unsteady. She clutched her notes, her lifeline. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but clear enough in the suddenly silent room. She approached the witness stand, her simple dress a stark contrast to Thorne's expensive suit. "Mr. Davies," she began, her voice gaining a little strength, "you testified that Apex Development's application was exemplary." "That is correct," Mr. Davies affirmed, though a flicker of something, surprise, annoyance, crossed his face. "And this exemplary application," Anya continued, her eyes fixed on him, "did it include a full environmental impact report specifically for the plot of land known as the Elm Street Community Garden, detailing its current use and biodiversity?" Thorne was on his feet instantly. "Objection, Your Honor. Relevance? The land is zoned for commercial development. Its current informal use is immaterial." Justice Alastair frowned. "Mr. Thorne, I'll allow the question for now. Ms. Sharma, please ensure your questions remain relevant to the permits in question." "Thank you, Your Honor," Anya said, turning back to Mr. Davies. "The report, Mr. Davies, was it specific to the garden or a general report for the larger district?" Mr. Davies shifted in his seat. Well, it was a comprehensive report for the entire development zone, which includes the plot in question. Anya pressed gently. But did it specifically acknowledge the existence of a decades-old, actively used community garden on that plot? Mr. Davies, did it mention the mature fruit trees, the pollinator habitats, the soil enrichment programs run by local volunteers? Mr. Davies licked his lips. The report focused on the suitability of the zone for the proposed development, Ms. Sharma. Individual, unzoned activities. So it did not specifically mention the garden or its ecological contributions? Anya persisted, her voice still quiet but firm. Not in those precise terms, no, Mr. Davies conceded, his earlier confidence visibly deflating. A small murmur rippled through the jury box. Anya had not raised her voice, had not used any legal jargon, but she had planted a seed of doubt. She had shown a small crack in the supposedly flawless facade. Thorne looked irritated, waving his hand dismissively as if to say this was a trivial point. But Anya knew it wasn't trivial. It was about a system that overlooked the small, the vital, the human, in its rush to embrace the grand and the profitable. She asked a few more questions, each one simple, direct, chipping away at the witness's certainty, highlighting omissions in the official record, before finally saying, "No further questions, Your Honor." As she walked back to her table, she didn't look at Thorne or the jury. She focused on the image of her grandmother's hands, patiently tending her own small garden, coaxing life from the earth. The fight was far from over, but she had survived, her first encounter. She had spoken, and in her own small way she had been heard. The day was long, filled with more witnesses for the petitioner, each one presented by Thorne with an air of unassailable authority. But Anya held on to that small victory, that moment when Mr. Davies had hesitated. It was a reminder that even the most imposing structures could have weaknesses if one only knew where and how to look. The following days of the trial saw Marcus Thorne parade a series of experts before the court. There was an architect who spoke glowingly of the state-of-the-art design of the proposed luxury high-rise, its sustainable features, a claim Anya found deeply ironic given it would destroy a thriving green space, and the aesthetic improvement it would bring to the neighborhood. Then came an economist, armed with charts and projections, who detailed the hundreds of jobs the project would create, the millions in tax revenue it would generate, and the overall boost to the city's prosperity. Each presentation was slick, professional, and designed to overwhelm. Thorne, with his theatrical gravitas, guided his witnesses through their testimony, ensuring their narratives aligned perfectly with Apex Development's vision of a brighter, more prosperous future. A future in which Anya's little garden was but a forgotten footnote. Anya continued her quiet diligence. When it was her turn to cross-examine, she didn't try to match Thorne's legal prowess or his witness's technical expertise. Instead, she focused on simple, human questions that often left the experts flustered. To the architect she asked, "In your beautiful design, sir, where is the space for the children of the less affluent families in the neighborhood to play? The garden currently serves that purpose, free of charge." The architect, caught off guard, mumbled something about public parks several blocks away, parks that Anya knew were often overcrowded and less accessible. To the economist she inquired, "You speak of jobs created, but have you accounted for the jobs lost, sir? The small local businesses, like the bakery that relies on herbs from our garden, or the community co-op that sells our produce? And what about the unquantifiable value of food security for low-income families who supplement their diets from the garden's bounty?" The economist, accustomed to dealing in macroeconomic figures, looked down his nose at her. "Ms. Sharma, we are talking about significant large-scale economic impact. Such micro-concerns, while perhaps personally relevant to you, are statistically insignificant in the broader picture." "Insignificant to whom, sir?" Anya asked softly, and though he didn't answer, her question hung in the air, resonating with a few jurors who looked thoughtfully from the economist back to Anya. Marcus Thorne would often object. accusing Anya of being sentimental, of straying from the legal facts, of trying to sway the jury with emotion rather than evidence. Sometimes Justice Allister would sustain his objections, her expression unreadable. Other times she would overrule him, a glint of something, perhaps curiosity, perhaps a grudging respect, in her eyes. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said on one such occasion, "Ms. Sharma is representing herself. While her methods may be unorthodox, she is entitled to present her perspective. I trust the jury can distinguish between emotional appeal and factual relevance." Anya felt a small surge of gratitude, though she knew the judge's impartiality was paramount. The hardest part for Anya was the isolation. During breaks, Thorne would be surrounded by his team, strategizing, laughing, exuding confidence. Anya would sit alone reviewing her notes, eating the simple sandwich she'd packed, the weight of the world on her shoulders. She missed her garden, the feel of the earth in her hands, the reassuring hum of bees. The sterile, adversarial environment of the courtroom felt like another planet. Yet, she persevered. She thought of Mr. Henderson's words, "Persistence, my dear." She thought of her grandmother's quiet strength, and she thought of the community that was counting on her, even if they couldn't be there in the courtroom every day. Each evening, she would return to her small apartment, exhausted but resolute. She would meticulously review the day's transcript, if she could afford a copy, or rely on her own detailed notes, preparing for the next day, searching for those small cracks, those overlooked details, those human truths that the corporation's slick narrative tried to obscure. She knew she was an unlikely warrior, armed not with a sword and shield, but with a faded satchel, a keen sense of observation, and an unwavering belief in what was right. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the atmosphere in the courtroom began to shift. The initial amusement and pity directed at Anya were gradually being replaced by a grudging attention. Jurors who had initially dismissed her began to watch her more closely when she spoke, their expressions less certain, more contemplative. Even Marcus Thorne, though he would never admit it, seemed to find her quiet tenacity more irksome than he had anticipated. He had expected a quick, easy victory, not this persistent, methodical chipping away at his carefully constructed case by a woman who, by all conventional measures, should have been utterly out of her depth. Anya was indeed out of her depth in terms of legal knowledge, but she was deeply rooted in something else, the undeniable truth of her lived experience and the collective experience of her community. And that, she was beginning to realize, was a form of power Thorne hadn't accounted for. The turning point, subtle yet significant, came during Anya's cross-examination of Apex Development's own CEO, a Mr. Alistair Finch, a man whose polished veneer and air of self-importance filled the courtroom. Marcus Thorne had presented Finch as a visionary leader, a benevolent captain of industry dedicated to building a better city. Finch, under Thorne's gentle questioning, spoke eloquently about corporate responsibility, community engagement, though he couldn't name a single community member he'd personally engaged with regarding the garden, and the transformative power of Apex's projects. He was smooth, articulate, and utterly convinced of his own righteousness. When it was Anya's turn, she approached him not with aggression, but with a quiet, almost sorrowful demeanor. "Mr. Finch," she began, her voice soft but carrying clearly, "you speak of community engagement. Were you aware that the Elm Street Community Garden has been a registered community project with the City Council for the past 15 years, with documented contributions to local schools and senior centers?" Finch blinked, his smile faltering for a microsecond. I believe our legal team reviewed all pertinent city documents, Ms. Sharma." "Perhaps," Anya said gently. "But were you personally aware that last spring your company received a petition signed by over 500 local residents, including the principals of 2 nearby schools, respectfully requesting a meeting to discuss alternatives to destroying the garden?" Finch looked towards Marcus Thorne, a silent plea for assistance, but Thorne could only offer a tight, reassuring nod. "We receive many communications, Ms. Sharma. It's impossible to personally attend to all of them. This one was hand-delivered to your corporate headquarters, Mr. Finch, addressed directly to you. It included photographs of the children tending their plots, of the Harvest Festival, of the educational workshops held there. Did you see it? Anya's voice was not accusatory, but it held a thread of steel. Finch cleared his throat. As I said, my office handles a large volume of mail. Important matters are brought to my attention. And this wasn't deemed important, Mr. Finch? The voices of 500 members of the community your project claims to serve? Anya held up a slightly crumpled, much-handled copy of the petition, its pages filled with signatures. The voices of children asking where they would learn about growing food, of seniors asking where they would find a quiet green space to sit, of families asking how they would supplement their food budget without the garden's produce. The courtroom was utterly silent. The jurors leaned forward. Even Justice Allister seemed to be holding her breath. Finch's composure was visibly cracking. He looked less like a visionary leader and more like a man cornered. "Ms. Sharma," he said, his voice losing its earlier smoothness, "Apex Development operates within the bounds of the law. We acquired the land legally. We have the permits to develop it. While these community activities are unfortunate to disrupt, progress sometimes requires difficult choices." "Indeed it does, Mr. Finch," Anya agreed, her gaze unwavering. "But true progress, I believe, considers all costs, not just the financial ones. It listens to all voices, not just the loudest or the wealthiest." She paused, then asked, "Mr. Finch, have you ever personally visited the Elm Street Community Garden?" He hesitated. I've seen photographs, site plans. But have you ever walked its paths, Mr. Finch? Have you ever spoken to the people who find nourishment and solace there? Have you ever tasted a tomato grown with a child's own hands in that soil?" Finch had no answer. He looked down at his own manicured hands, then back at Anya, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Annoyance, perhaps. Or maybe, just maybe, a sliver of discomfort. "No further questions, Your Honor," Anya said, turning away. She had not destroyed him with legal maneuvering, but she had exposed a fundamental disconnect, a profound lack of understanding, or perhaps care, at the very heart of Apex Development's grand vision. Marcus Thorne immediately requested a redirect, attempting to repair the damage, to paint Finch once again as a responsible leader. But the image of the flustered CEO, unable to answer simple, human questions, lingered in the minds of the jury. Anya had shown them that behind the corporate facade, behind the talk of progress and profit, there was a distinct absence of genuine connection to the very community Apex claimed to be serving. It was a small victory, another crack in the wall, but Anya felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was not just fighting for a garden. She was fighting for the principle that people mattered more than plans, that communities were more than just collections of buildings, and that true development should enrich lives, not just bank accounts. The weight of the faded fabric satchel on her table suddenly felt a little lighter. It wasn't just full of notes and documents anymore. It was full of the silent, resilient spirit of her community. When it was finally Anya's turn to present her own case, a different kind of energy filled the courtroom. Gone was the slick polish of Marcus Thorne's presentation, the parade of highly paid experts. Instead, Anya, in her simple navy dress, offered something far more grounded, more personal. She didn't have glossy architectural renderings or complex economic projections. What she had were the stories, the evidence of a community's heart, painstakingly collected and carefully preserved in her humble satchel. Her first piece of evidence was a large, slightly faded photograph album. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice quiet but firm. "This album documents the life of the Elm Street Community Garden over the past 2 decades. She opened it carefully, placing it on an easel so the jury could see. The first photograph showed a barren, neglected patch of land, strewn with rubble. "This," she said, "is what the plot looked like 22 years ago, an abandoned eyesore." Then she turned the page. A group of smiling, determined people, younger versions of some of the faces now watching from the public gallery, were clearing the debris, their faces smudged with dirt, their clothes old. And this is us, the founding members, starting with nothing but hope and borrowed tools. Page after page, the garden bloomed. Children with watering cans, seniors planting seedlings, vibrant harvests of vegetables and flowers, community picnics, educational workshops. Each photograph told a story of collaboration, of shared effort, of joy found in simple things. Marcus Thorne objected frequently. "Objection, Your Honor. This is pure sentimentality. It has no bearing on the legal ownership of the property or my client's right to develop it." Anya would respond calmly, "Your Honor, this evidence demonstrates the established, continuous, and beneficial use of the land by the community, a factor that I believe is relevant when considering the spirit, if not the precise letter, of certain land use precedents, and also speaks to the public interest." Sometimes Justice Alastair would ask Anya to be more specific about the legal relevance, and Anya would refer to her notes, citing passages she'd found in obscure legal journals or city archives about public domain and prescriptive easements, concepts she was still grappling with but presented with sincere conviction. More often than not, the judge would allow the photographs, instructing the jury to consider their relevance appropriately. Anya then presented letters from local school principals, thanking the garden volunteers for providing hands-on learning experiences for their students. She showed receipts for seeds and tools purchased collectively over the years, meticulous records of produce donated to local food banks and shelters. She displayed articles from small community newsletters celebrating the garden's anniversaries and its role in fostering neighborhood cohesion. It wasn't the kind of evidence that Marcus Thorne was used to. It wasn't certified by experts or notarized by officials, but it had an undeniable authenticity, a raw, human power that the corporation's polished presentations lacked. Thorne tried to dismiss it all as irrelevant, amateurish. During his cross-examination of Anya when she took the stand to testify about the garden's history and her role in it, he was particularly condescending. "Ms. Sharma," he began, pacing before her, his tone dripping with false sympathy, "it's clear you have a strong emotional attachment to this little patch of land. Commendable in its own way. But surely you understand that progress cannot be halted by nostalgia?" Anya met his gaze, her own clear and steady. "Mr. Thorne, I understand progress, but I also understand that true progress doesn't destroy what is precious and irreplaceable, without very careful consideration. This garden is not just about nostalgia, sir. It's about food security for families who struggle. It's about a safe place for children to learn and play. It's about a green lung in a concrete jungle. It's about community. Are these things not also components of progress?" Thorne scoffed. "A handful of tomato plants versus a multi-million-dollar development that will benefit thousands? The scale, Ms. Sharma, the scale!" "Perhaps, Mr. Thorne," Anya replied. "The smallest things, when they touch many lives deeply, can have a scale of importance that cannot be measured in dollars alone." Her words, spoken without artifice, seemed to strike a chord with several jurors. They were no longer looking at her with pity, but with a growing respect. They saw not an eccentric old woman, but a passionate advocate, a David facing Goliath, with nothing but truth and conviction. Anya knew she was far from winning. The legal mountain before her was still immense, but she had laid her foundation, built not on clever arguments or legal loopholes, but on the undeniable reality of what the Elm Street Community Garden meant to the people whose lives it touched. And that, she hoped, would be enough to make them listen. The emotional core of Anya's defense came with her witnesses. They were not polished experts or city officials, but ordinary members of her community, people whose lives had been quietly enriched by the Elm Street Community Garden. First to take the stand was Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman with kind eyes and hands gnarled by arthritis, who lived in a small apartment overlooking the garden. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke, but her words were clear and heartfelt. "That garden," she said, looking directly at the jury, It is my window to the world. Since my husband passed, it is hard for me to get out. But I sit by my window, and I watch the children laugh. I see the flowers bloom. I smell the good earth after the rain. It reminds me that life goes on, that there is still beauty. Marcus Thorne, during his cross-examination, was gentle, but dismissive. Mrs. Rodriguez, that's a lovely sentiment, but you understand this is a legal proceeding about property rights, not about pleasant views? I understand, sir, she replied, her dignity unruffled. But sometimes what is legal is not always what is right for the human heart. That garden, it is more than just land. It is medicine for the soul. Next came a young mother, Maria, holding her small son's hand. She testified how the garden had provided fresh, healthy food for her family when she had lost her job. We didn't have much, Maria said, her voice thick with emotion, but we always had vegetables from the garden. Anya, she showed us how to grow them. She shared everything. It wasn't just food, it was hope. It was knowing someone cared. Thorne tried to paint her as simply a beneficiary of Anya's charity, implying her testimony was biased. Miss Sharma is a kind woman, no doubt, he said, but her personal generosity doesn't change the legal status of the land. Maria looked him straight in the eye. It's not just Anya's generosity, sir. It's the generosity of the earth, of the community. We all share. We all contribute. That garden taught my son that food doesn't just come from a supermarket. It comes from hard work, from care, from the sun and the rain. Is that not a valuable lesson for the future of your city? Even Thorne seemed momentarily taken aback by her quiet passion. Then came Mr. Chen, a retired science teacher, who spoke about the educational workshops held in the garden, teaching children about biodiversity, composting, and sustainable urban agriculture. He presented photographs of children excitedly examining ladybugs, of teenagers learning to build raised beds. This garden, Mr. Chen stated, is a living classroom. It fosters a connection to the natural world that is desperately needed in our urban environment. To destroy it would be to destroy a vital educational resource. Thorne attempted to discredit him by questioning his formal qualifications in urban planning, but Mr. Chen simply smiled. Sir, I may not have a degree in urban planning, but I have spent 40 years teaching children, and I can tell you with certainty that the lessons learned in that garden, lessons of patience, cooperation, and respect for nature, are more valuable than any luxury apartment. Each witness, in their own way, painted a vivid picture of a thriving, essential community hub. They were not eloquent in the way Thorne's experts were, but their sincerity was palpable. They spoke from lived experience, from the heart, and their collective testimony began to weave a powerful counter-narrative to Apex Development's sterile vision of progress. Anya guided them with gentle, simple questions, allowing their stories to unfold naturally. She didn't try to embellish or dramatize. She simply let their truths be heard. The jury listened intently, their expressions shifting from skepticism, to empathy. They were beginning to see the faces behind the legal dispute, to understand the human cost of what Apex Development dismissed as mere sentimentality. Marcus Thorne's frustration was becoming increasingly evident. His usual tactics, of intimidation and condescension, seemed to backfire against these earnest, unassuming witnesses. When he tried to trip them up with legal jargon or aggressive questioning, they would often look at him with a kind of bewildered honesty that made him appear bullying and out of touch. Anya felt a growing sense of quiet hope. Her community was speaking, and their voices, though ordinary, were resonating with an extraordinary power. She was not alone in this fight. She was merely the conduit for a collective truth, a truth that was slowly but surely beginning to fill the courtroom. The faded fabric satchel, once a symbol of her solitary struggle, now felt like a repository of a community's strength. The day arrived for closing arguments. The courtroom was packed, an air of tense anticipation hanging heavy. Marcus Thorne, ever the showman, delivered his closing with practiced eloquence and unwavering confidence. He strode before the jury box, his voice a finely tuned instrument, hitting all the familiar notes of legal certainty and economic imperative. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone grave, "we have presented you with irrefutable evidence. Apex Development is the legal owner of the property in question. They have followed every statute, every ordinance, every guideline. Their right to develop this land is unassailable under the law." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the jurors. "Ms. Sharma, with all due respect to her passion, has presented you with a case built on emotion, on nostalgia, on a resistance to the inevitable and necessary march of progress. She asks you to ignore the law, to disregard established property rights based on a sentimental attachment to a small, informally used piece of land." He continued, reiterating the economic benefits, the jobs, the tax revenues, the modernity the project would bring. He skillfully downplayed the community garden, referring to it as an unauthorized allotment, its benefits subjective and unquantifiable. He painted Anya as well-meaning but misguided, an idealist whose personal feelings could not be allowed to obstruct the greater good, as defined by his client. "Your duty, ladies and gentlemen," Thorne concluded, his voice dropping to a solemn register, "is to apply the law as it stands, not as one might wish it to be. And the law in this case is unequivocally clear. I urge you to find in favor of my client, Apex Development, and allow our city to move forward into a brighter, more prosperous future." He returned to his seat, a picture of calm assurance, his team nodding in agreement. A heavy silence fell as all eyes turned to Anya Sharma. She rose slowly, her simple navy dress seeming almost luminous in the stark courtroom light. She clutched no papers, her hands clasped loosely before her. She didn't pace or gesture dramatically. She simply stood, her gaze resting on the jury, not with the calculated intensity of a seasoned lawyer, but with an open, honest sincerity. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice soft but carrying a surprising resonance. "Mr. Thorne is a very skilled lawyer, and he has presented his case very well. He speaks of the law, of progress, of economic benefits, and these are important things." She paused, taking a breath. "But I would like to speak to you about what it means to be a community. I would like to speak to you about the value of things that cannot always be measured in dollars and cents, but are nonetheless essential to the human spirit." She didn't use legal jargon. She didn't try to refute Thorne's points with complex arguments. Instead, she spoke from the heart. She reminded them of Mrs. Rodriguez's testimony, her window to the world. She spoke of Maria's children learning where food comes from, of Mr. Chen's living classroom. She spoke of the quiet solace the garden offered, the shared laughter, the sense of belonging it fostered in a neighborhood that often felt overlooked. "Mr. Thorne calls our garden an informal allotment," Anya said, a hint of sadness in her voice. "But for 20 years, it has been a place of formal learning, of formal sharing, of formal community building. It is informal only in the sense that it is open to all, regardless of wealth or status. It is informal only in the sense that its currency is kindness and cooperation, not profit." She looked at each juror in turn. "The law is important, yes, but the law is made to serve people, to ensure justice and fairness, and sometimes, I believe, true justice requires us to look beyond the letter of the law to its spirit, to consider the impact of our decisions on the lives of ordinary people." She didn't speak for long. Her words were simple, direct, unadorned, but they carried the weight of authenticity, the power of a truth deeply felt and honestly expressed. "I ask you," she concluded, her voice gentle but firm, "to consider not just the future of a single plot of land, but the future of our community. I ask you to consider whether true progress builds by destroying or by nurturing. I ask you to listen to the quiet voices, the ones that speak not of profit, but of connection, of care, of the simple human need for a place to grow, a place to belong." She sat down. The silence in the courtroom was profound. No one moved. No one whispered. Anya had not offered a dazzling display of legal rhetoric, but she had offered something far more compelling, a glimpse into the heart of her community, and an invitation to the jury to consider a different kind of wealth, a different kind of progress. Justice Allister gave her instructions to the jury, her voice even and impartial. Then, with a rustle of robes, the jury filed out to begin their deliberations. Anya watched them go, her heart a mixture of hope and trepidation. She had done all she could. Now, it was in their hands. The wait for the verdict stretched on, each minute an eternity. The courtroom, once abuzz with activity, now felt strangely empty, suspended in a limbo of anticipation. Marcus Thorne and his team huddled in a corner, their hushed conversation punctuated by occasional confident smiles and reassuring nods. They exuded an air of professional detachment, as if the outcome were a foregone conclusion, a mere formality. Anya sat alone at her table, her faded fabric satchel resting beside her. She didn't try to review her notes or second-guess her closing argument. Instead, she closed her eyes and brought to mind the image of the Elm Street community garden in full bloom. The vibrant reds of the tomatoes, the deep greens of the kale, the cheerful yellow of the sunflowers reaching for the sky. She remembered the scent of damp earth after a spring rain, the buzz of bees flitting from blossom to blossom, the sound of children's laughter as they chased butterflies. These were the things she was fighting for, the tangible, irreplaceable realities that no amount of legal jargon or economic projection could diminish. She thought of her grandmother, her hands calloused from years of working the soil, her face etched with the wisdom of a life lived close to the earth. "The truth, Anya," her grandmother had often said, "is like a seed. It may be small and buried deep, but with patience and care it will always find its way to the light." Anya held on to that thought, a small, steady ember in the growing darkness of her anxiety. Doubts gnawed at her. Had she done enough? Had her simple words been enough to counter Thorne's powerful rhetoric? Had she been foolish to believe she could stand against such a formidable opponent, armed with nothing but her conviction and a collection of community stories? The weight of responsibility felt immense. It wasn't just her fight anymore. It was the fight of Mrs. Rodriguez, of Maria and her son, of Mr. Chen, of all the hundreds of people whose lives were interwoven with the fate of that small patch of green. She replayed moments from the trial in her mind. Thorne's dismissive sneer, Finch's flustered testimony, the jurors' inscrutable faces. Had she missed a crucial point? Had she failed to ask the right question? The what-ifs were a relentless tide, threatening to pull her under. She opened her eyes and looked around the grand, intimidating courtroom. It was a place of power, of precedent, of pronouncements that could change lives in an instant. And she, Anya Sharma, a woman who mended her own clothes and grew her own vegetables, was daring to challenge that power. It seemed an almost ludicrous proposition. A court attendant entered and announced that the jury had reached a verdict. A jolt went through Anya. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The courtroom began to fill again, the murmurs now tinged with a palpable tension. Marcus Thorne and his team took their places, their expressions carefully neutral, though a hint of smug anticipation played around Thorne's lips. Anya took a deep breath, trying to steady her trembling hands. This was it, the culmination of months of tireless work, of sleepless nights, of unwavering hope against seemingly insurmountable odds. Justice Allister entered, her face impassive. The court clerk asked the jury foreperson to stand. The room was so quiet, Anya could hear the frantic beating of her own heart. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman Anya remembered looking particularly thoughtful during her closing argument, rose, a piece of paper clutched in her hand. Her face gave nothing away. "Madam Foreperson," the clerk intoned, "has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" "We have," the foreperson replied, her voice clear and steady. "And on the matter of the petition of Apex Development versus Anya Sharma, how do you find?" Anya held her breath. The world seemed to stop. The foreperson looked briefly at Anya, then at Marcus Thorne, before addressing the judge. "We find," she declared, her voice ringing through the silent courtroom, "in favor of the respondent, Anya Sharma." For a moment Anya didn't understand. The words seemed to float in the air, disconnected from reality. Then they sank in favor of the respondent. In her favor. A gasp rippled through the public gallery. Marcus Thorne's face, a moment before so confident, froze in an expression of stunned disbelief. His junior associates stared, mouths agape. Anya felt a wave of emotion so powerful it almost buckled her knees. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the faces around her. She had won. Her simple truth, her community's quiet voice had been heard, and it had prevailed. The aftermath of the verdict was a kaleidoscope of emotions. Anya sat at her table, tears streaming silently down her face, a profound sense of relief and gratitude washing over her. The courtroom erupted in a buzz of surprised whispers and exclamations. From the public gallery, a smattering of applause broke out, quickly stifled by the bailiff, but the sentiment was clear. Members of her community who had managed to attend rushed towards her, their faces alight with joy and disbelief, offering hugs and heartfelt congratulations. Mrs. Rodriguez, helped by Maria, made her way to Anya, her wrinkled hand patting Anya's arm. "You did it, dear," she whispered, her own eyes wet. "You showed them the heart is stronger than the concrete." Marcus Thorne and his team were visibly reeling. Thorne himself stood stiffly, his face a mask of controlled fury and utter shock. His carefully constructed case, his years of legal experience, his powerful client, all had been undone by a woman with no formal legal training, armed only with her conviction and the truth of her community. He exchanged a few sharp, frustrated words with his associates, then gathered his papers with a brusque movement, his aura of invincibility shattered. He didn't look at Anya as he swept out of the courtroom, his defeat a palpable presence in his wake. Mr. Alistair Finch, the Apex CEO, who had returned for the verdict, looked ashen. He stared blankly ahead for a moment, then rose and departed without a word. The architect of a grand vision, now facing the unexpected reality of a community's resilience. Justice Alistair, after officially recording the verdict and thanking the jury, gave Anya a small, almost imperceptible nod before leaving the bench. It was a gesture that spoke volumes, a silent acknowledgement of the extraordinary feat Anya had accomplished. News of the verdict spread quickly. Local reporters, who had initially covered the case with a certain degree of detached amusement at the David and Goliath narrative, now scrambled for interviews. Anya, overwhelmed and still trying to process her victory, politely declined, saying only, "This wasn't my victory. It was the community's victory. The garden is safe. That's all that matters." The Elm Street Community Garden, once a forgotten plot threatened with erasure, became a symbol of hope and citizen empowerment. The story of the simple woman who took on a corporate giant and won, representing herself in court, captured the imagination of the city. People who had never heard of the garden before made pilgrimages to see it, to walk its paths, to offer their support. Volunteers flocked to help. Donations poured in, not just of money, but of seeds, tools, and time. The garden thrived, more vibrant and cherished than ever before. Anya returned to her quiet life, to her mended clothes and her love for the earth. She didn't seek fame or recognition. The true reward was the continued existence of the garden, the laughter of children amidst the flowers, the shared bounty of the harvest. But something had changed. The respect she now received was different. The initial pity and condescension were gone, replaced by a deep admiration for her courage, her tenacity, her unwavering moral compass. She had shown her community, and indeed the wider city, that one person, armed with truth and persistence, could make a difference, even against the most formidable odds. Her victory inspired others. Small community groups facing similar battles against powerful interests sought her advice, not for legal expertise, but for her wisdom, her quiet strength, her belief in the power of ordinary people. Anya always shared what she could, encouraging them to find their own voices, to gather their own truths, just as she had. The Elm Street Community Garden remained a sanctuary, a testament to what can be achieved when people stand together for what they believe in. And Anya Sharma, the woman who had entered the courtroom like a whisper, became a quiet legend, a reminder that the most profound victories are often won not with the loudest voice, but with the truest heart. Her faded fabric satchel, once a symbol of her solitary struggle, now rested in a place of honor in the small community shed at the garden, a reminder of the journey they had all taken and the simple, powerful truth that had, against all odds, found its way to the light.